are wondering, hey, I'm not in California. Does this really matter? Is it applicable to me? Absolutely. And we will get into why. But, before we get going on the Garment Worker Protection Act, I wanted to just do very quickly a quick recap of the incredible year that we have had. And I see a few more people trickling in, and I'm like, I'll make sure to just let you in. But, I think it's really nice because this year feels exhausting already. I don't know about you all, but I was walking into saying, is it really the 11th of January? I feel like a whole lifetime has passed, for me on a personal front. My kids went back to school in person, which I think came with its own sets of anxiety. I know with everything that has happened in the nation's capital, for those of us here in the US, it's been hard to see our democracy under siege in this way. Certainly growing up in Pakistan, some of the remnants of that violence felt very familiar, but I do think that we forge on and carry on, and this is where the beauty of our community and all of the ways that we show up as everyday citizens to build back and build back better matters so very much. And so I thought, to start us on a high note, let's just remember we are a predominantly team of volunteers, and we have done the most incredible things in 2020. In January, some of our community members who work for Everlane started to report union busting activity while working in the retail stores. We were the first organization to really call out Everlane, to engage with their CEO. 1,200 of you all joined us to hold Everlane accountable. And so talk about starting the year with a bang. We always, outside of our advocacy and transparency work, love to be thinking about ways to bring the sustainable fashion movement to our own lifestyle. And to that end, we, with our friends over at Role Models Management, many of whom are also our ambassadors, these are models that want to use their platform to do more good. We created a fun short, 10 ways to dress as a susty fashion pro. Sam's going to put that link in the chat. I think it's a wonderful way to just share with friends as they're thinking about, well, how am I going to really keep my commitments to the movement? And so that was January, February, started off with, oh, the world is going to be fine. I remember I was filming with the Fair Trade campaign in February in New York with the wonderful Cameron Russell, and we're like, oh yes, we'll be back for drinks in March. Turns out that was not going to happen. Of course, we all entered lockdown in March. So many of us thought it was going to be a 2-week, 3-week thing. Remember when we were sanitizing all our groceries, but weren't sure we had to wear masks? That feels so long ago, y'all, but it was just March. And of course, within the fashion industry, the industry made the catastrophic decision to cancel orders that were in production and that were already on ships headed here to the US and to European shores. And this was really our movement, where our pay up movement, the work, the relentless campaigning that you all did, it went viral. There were 270,000 of us. I know a lot of us wrote to our grandmas and moms, like, sign this petition. And, the more we took over the Instagram handles and the Twitter feeds of these brands, we were able, and, there were some brands that trickled in through the fall at this point to get 25 brands to commit to paying back half of that stolen money. And that is no small feat because of so much of the wage theft and order cancellations, which had meant that workers were being pushed further and further into income insecurity. Summer, as you all know, is always our time to say no thank you to all the promotional ads that are showing up in our feed from fashion brands, even the ones that we love. So we all did a virtual cleanse, if you will. It was super exciting to have actress Nat Kelly join us on this journey, and for 1,145 of us to do the no new clothes pledge. Special shout out to Sam and Victoria and others who also calculated how much money we saved as a community, because that's always a good reason to not be buying new clothes and instead spend our time on activism and to be looking at our water and carbon footprint. You would think by August we were a little tired, but instead we were galvanized to say so much of what's broken, the inequities in the fashion industry, were really illustrated in this pandemic. All the brands that we're talking about, being sustainable and essentially putting themselves forth as the guard keepers, the gatehouse for building a sustainable and just fashion industry, had abjectly failed fashion's most essential workers. And so in September, with the incredible Elizabeth Klein, who's here to be on a panel with us today, she is, as you all know, an author and award-winning journalist. She was part of our book club. We also had the wonderful folks, Nantar is here from the Garment Workers Center, other organizations that are frontline garment worker organizations, such as Stand Up Lanka and Awaj. And we came back to take power back, essentially to say, for too long, 20 years, the fashion industry has relied on voluntary codes of conduct, on a broken and flawed monitoring system, which is essentially just focused on the symptoms and not the root causes. And what would a true worker-centric roadmap to building fashion back as a just and sustainable fashion industry look like? That gave birth to the Pay Up Fashion Coalition. At this point, we are many organizations strong. If you haven't yet signed the petition, please do. Sam is going to drop it in the chat. But it really is our way of holding the industry accountable, to be assuring that they don't forget workers right now when there is a growing humanitarian crisis, but that we keep our eye on the prize and really recognize that at the end of the day, this is about legal reform and enforcement of that reform, which really brings us to why today's conversation is so important. And you would think that then we would be done, but it turns out that in November and December, we continued to slay, with our transparency report, which we have been getting so much correspondence from greenwashers such as Allbirds and Everlane, from some of the smaller sustainable brands who are grateful for our solidarity, and some of the bigger brands wanting to know how they can improve their score. Sam's going to drop the brand directory, which we had given you all a tour of at the end of the year. Definitely know that we are going to be adding hundreds of brands over the next month. And really, this is our way of holding the industry accountable. We ended with a party, as we always do here at Remake. Sadly, it was virtual this year, but I will say, the champagne glasses were raised. You all looked beautiful. And we really, really ended on a high note with 612 ambassadors strong. And so as we go into the new year and this recap, we have a quick article. If you want to share it with friends and family, if you're already thinking about recruiting new ambassadors to the movement, just know that this impact article is a great way to get people excited. I sincerely believe that we slayed 2020, but guess what? We are only getting started. And so I am going to admit, oh my goodness, it's really a party, 15 more people into our community. But really, share these resources, take a moment to celebrate everything that we have accomplished. And that brings us nicely to the matter at hand today, which is thinking about what does it mean to really bring the fashion industry to account in a way that there is proper legal reform. There's conversation of this happening within the UK, within the EU, but right here in California, we have a bill that did the votes, but this is a way for our global community to really come and say one legal wage. It's the bare minimum that we should be doing. And so, I wanted to start with a quick introduction. First and foremost, we have the wonderful Elizabeth Klein. Elizabeth, I could go on and on. The funny thing is, Elizabeth and I have never met before. And literally, we text every day. It feels as though we have become pandemic besties, if that's a thing. But Elizabeth, I would love, in your own words, as you start to introduce yourself, you are a journalist that asks the right questions. You have written, overdressed with change so many of our community members' lives. You were on our book club to be talking about your newest book, Conscious Closet. But as we were, on a very personal front, fighting for the pay up movement, in many ways, you in your own words talk about how you've shifted. You thought of yourself very much as a consumer activist, and instead you're really coming back, a sustainable consumer, but you're really coming back to your activist roots. And so I would love for you to share a little bit of that journey, and why you think that rather than building a sustainable wardrobe, this is now the time to be fighting for garment worker rights.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And 2020 was a year that changed everyone's life, and like I'm no exception. And being able to work with you, Aisha, and the Remake community, and to work more closely with Garment Workers Center has just been a tremendous honor. And I feel like this community has so much power. And I believe 2021 is going to be the year of solutions to so many of these systemic problems that you've already mentioned. But yeah, just a little bit of background in terms of why I made this big leap from the ethical consumer activism I had been doing really, really heavily in 2019. I had just launched a book called The Conscious Closet, and made this pivot back towards activism and grassroots mass movement building with the Pay Up campaign. Just by coincidence, in January of last year, I was starting to report out some stories in Bangladesh. I was hearing that prices paid to factories were actually going down, and that even though we had this huge ethical and sustainable fashion movement, on social media in, the West, the global North, it wasn't really having a lot of demonstrable impact on garment worker lives. So I was already starting to question that disconnect, even heading into the pandemic. And then when brands canceled orders, it brought to the surface all of these systemic problems that we have been grappling with for decades. Like you mentioned a few of them already, Aisha, and I know we're going to get into this with Nayantara and the Garment Workers Center and the bill, but the way that the fashion industry is set up right now structurally disadvantages workers' rights. These are systemic problems that we can't change through the way we shop alone. It is not enough. We need regulatory reform. We need legal reform. And really what's missing, and this is why this bill is so exciting, is we need to close this legal loophole that makes it so that brands can say, garment workers aren't my workers. I'm not responsible for these people at all. Because every time a crisis happens, that is what they say. And with Pay Up, what we saw is brands canceled orders, factories immediately laid people off without pay. So the pandemic once again showed that, yes, brands control the conditions in their factories. Therefore, they have to be responsible for what happens in the factories. This bill is precedent setting. Like, we have to get this thing passed. So I just want everyone to understand the importance of what we are being asked to do in supporting this, and just get really excited, because this is going to be a fight, but we're going to have fun and we are going to win.
Incredible, Elizabeth. I love the Elizabeth that's out there to fight. I now wanted to introduce the wonderful Nayantara from Garment Workers Center. Nayantara, welcome. I would love for the community to know you a little bit on the personal front. What brought you really to be thinking of organizing as the way to push forward in building a just and sustainable fashion industry. And certainly in your work, in working so closely with LA garment workers, you have borne witness to what the conditions are like. And so really hearing from your lens on, why is this legislation the best way forward?
Well, good morning, all, and thank you so much for having me here. I feel really inspired just by seeing all of your faces and knowing what you've accomplished in the last year. I'm really thrilled that we have you with us as we push forward with this act. And so my background is actually in the fashion industry. I studied fashion design as an undergrad. And for about a dozen years, I ran a tailoring business doing all sorts of garment alterations initially as a kind of alternative to sending things to the landfill, right? And finding my place in an industry that I'd studied and thought I wanted to be in and really ultimately felt not at home in because of the exploitation and the environmental impact. So actually years ago, I tailored something for Elizabeth Klein for her first book, her first book event, I remember at least. And that was in New York. But along the way, I also went to grad school and I started studying labor rights in the garment industry, recognizing that I wanted to do more than just sew for individuals. I want to see what I can do for other people who sew for a living. And while I was in grad school, it was 2013 through 2015-ish. So Bangladesh was really the hot spot. I went, visited factories in Bangladesh. I met with factory owners and garment workers of all sorts, like including factories that you wouldn't imagine are there, hiding behind a bunch of alleys, behind a bunch of buildings, and then factories where the owners take you there on a helicopter, and it's almost like a college campus. So I got to see the extent of garment manufacturing at that global scale. But in my research, there was a lot of interesting elements that I found that were really similar to what was happening in Los Angeles. And when I came to a point where I was living in New York at the time, I thought, am I going to move to Bangladesh? That might be a little bit more difficult than it would be to move to Los Angeles. Came out, did some research, met with some people, and ultimately moved here and connected immediately with the Garment Worker Center. So my introduction to Los Angeles fashion industry has always been from the perspective of the garment workers. And I had the privilege of working, of being a volunteer with the Garment Worker Center for several years. And I led with the outreach coordinator, Annie Shaw, a series of classes in the center's Espacio Creativo. So what I really learned from this is basically a skills and capacity building workshop for garment workers who are very intentionally kept at a certain skill level or even de-skilled so that they cannot advocate for higher pay in the system as it is. So we were teaching really talented production garment workers about things like design, pattern making, some other aspects along the way that they were never introduced to and they wanted to learn. Again, this is all based on curriculum and designed it fully based on what members wanted to learn. And then also the most powerful for me was having members who are trimmers. So in the factory floor, consider if you're thinking of the hierarchy as it plays out, trimmers fall on the lowest rung, and their job is simply to trim the threads off of production pieces as they come through. One of the members was never given an opportunity in, I think, over 20 years of working in the industry to operate a sewing machine. And she really wanted to. And so in that space, I got to learn from her what it was like, the dynamics that play out in the factory itself. I had already learned about the industry at an academic level, but to really see how then when she was able to learn the sewing machine and within a few months make garments for herself to wear, full garments, it was really powerful, really awesome. And it really inspired me to just continue to double down with my work with GWC. I eventually got hired last year. So last year was a crazy year for me too. And now I'm the center's industry researcher. I'm actually going to drop in the chat a link to a report that we just released in December of last month, which details the impact of COVID-19 on our members, as well as wage theft. And really the wage theft is the key piece and why I'm really here right now, because just as you've been advocating for brands to pay up on a global scale on their orders, we have in the industry here brands that don't take accountability for their supply chain and a study, I think a 2010 UCL, a Department of Labor study found that 73% of the price that's paid by brands and retailers to manufacturers, I'm sorry, 73% of the price that would be needed to reach a minimum wage is paid per item. So what this means is that brands knowingly are paying for goods at a price that cannot sustain a fair minimum wage. And this is further enabled by the piece rate system of pay. And so when we're talking to members in this Espacio Creativo, in general membership meetings, I'm hearing them tell me what the impact of literally earning $5 an hour is, $6 an hour. And especially during COVID, you know, our interactions with members are really limited because we're trying to reduce.
Have been spreading, right?
Yes, and they have, yeah.
Bring us home in terms of, you know, you've obviously spent so much of your life thinking about workers as an asset rather than a cost center, investing in the full lives of garment makers, which is so much of the Garment Worker Center's philosophy. And this report, you know, if you all are even just look at the executive summary, what you realize is everything that can happen overseas, everything that you and I have borne witness, whether in Cambodia or Bangladesh, happens right here in Los Angeles. And as we've learned, knowing that some of our friends across the pond have joined us also in Leicester. And so it really does come down to brands and retailers pushing on price. Now, we had some calls, you know, with some of our members last year thinking about how to get this bill passed. Obviously, the bill didn't pass, but here we are and it's been reintroduced. So I think to give people, and here I'm going to put you on the spot, you know, in 3 sentences, can you explain to everyone what is SB 62? Why didn't it pass last year? And, you know, how is it being reintroduced this year?
Sure. SB 62 eliminates the use of the piece rate system and establishes up-chain multilateral accountability. And it's
so to make it simple for people, that means that we are holding brands accountable for wage theft, right? Yeah. Go
yes,
ahead.
And we're doing this by actually empowering the garment workers' testimony, which means when garment workers bring a tag or label from clothing that they're making, this counts as evidence that they were producing clothing for that brand. So it's really in the bill itself, it's rooted in that. And there's also some elements that increase enforcement and just do this by redefining some of the definitions in law, because actually SB 62 is amending a current Garment Worker Protection Act, AB 633, that was enacted in 2001. Now, the bill didn't pass in 2020, but it did make it through a series of votes. It has to go through 3 votes in the Senate, 3 votes in the Assembly, and then to the governor. But at the final Assembly vote last year, it failed to be brought up for a vote due to time. The time ran out on the clock in the Assembly floor. And now this year, we are going to win this bill. We were also moving in a really condensed and awkward, I mean, even the California legislative calendar was really quirky last year because of the pandemic. And so we were kind of running along and trying to keep pace, and we did really well. This year, we are going to win. We have the experience of last year on our belt. And more than ever, it is clear that garment workers are really crucial to have and to nurture and to take care of, because they are the people who are making our masks. They are the people who are making our PPE, our gowns, our hospital gowns.
5 cents, right? And so there's some questions coming here in the chat. And Elizabeth, I'd love for you to weigh in, which are, you know, why do we think that it can pass now? Wendy wants to know, you know, what will we do differently? And Elizabeth, pulling you in, knowing that, you know, well, one thing to answer to you all from a Remake standpoint is, you know, we are working lockstep with the Garment Worker Center from the very beginning. You know, we have Nicholas Brown here from our friends over at Fashion Revolution USA. And similarly, I think the idea is a lot of collaboration with civil society organizations and labor organizers. But Elizabeth, I'm curious, knowing, you know, the Pay Up Coalition's work and the success that we had, and in some ways it was astonishing because, you know, to take you all behind the scenes, in March and April, we could barely get one brand to agree to pay up. And here we are with some of the biggest heavy hitters, 25 brands in, and it was really an exercise of a lot of behind the scenes conversations, engaging with business from the beginning, but also naming and shaming the bad actors who wouldn't do it till we leveraged and mobilized public pressure. And so, Elizabeth, I'd love your thoughts on lessons learned from Pay Up, and what are we going to do differently to make sure that we get this bill passed this time around?
I mean, the first thing is I don't think that we need to be demoralized by last year's experience. To Nayantara's point, we have an advantage now, and we know what industry groups are organized against the bill. And the other thing that we really need to remember is that this bill is ahead of the curve. When you look at labor rights across the United States, they are at really an all-time low. You have companies in the gig economy, in journalism, in fast food, janitorial services, who don't want to take responsibility for their workers that are contracted out. So this is a problem in industries across American society. It is one of the key drivers of inequality in the world. The fact that you have these huge lead firms that don't have any sort of financial responsibility for their most essential workers. We are talking about the people who make clothes. So this goes back to what I was saying before. We have to understand and believe that this is important, because it is. It is a huge, passing this act is so crucial to solving structural inequality in American society. So this is a big thing that we're working on. And then to your point, Aisha, we learned a lot working on Pay Up in terms of building coalitions. You know, a lot of people, the way that the media often portrays it is as if it's just people tagging brands on social media. And yes, that is a crucial part of the strategy. But behind the scenes, you have all of these groups working together on what that strategy is going to look like. And that's going to be really key to getting this act passed as well. And then the other thing is just stamina. You know, we can't, this isn't a one and done thing. It's a very long legislative cycle. And so everyone just needs to go into this year, you know, take care of yourself, do what you need to do to stay committed and be ready to fight for this act, like through the whole year.
And so I think, you know, to Wendy's question, that's what's different, right? That this time around, we are galvanized to come together early, really making sure that garment worker partners, the workers themselves, are front and center in being advocates for this bill, but all of us as citizen advocates helping and really amplifying the effort along the way. You know, Nayantara, there's a question here about, will we provide our amazing community who's ready to go, as I said, you know, rolling up their sleeves on what are some of the key legislative dates, and, you know, when should they be calling legislators? I think I will say to everyone, because it gets complex, the leg cycle is really long. Part of our commitment and why we're starting in January is every month we will have an action as the bill is going through the Assembly, through the Senate, so that there is key parts when we are making the calls, signing petitions and such. But Nayantara, for the community, you could just highlight, you know, what are some of the key dates and why, I guess here we are in January, our first focus really is on engaging the governor's office.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so the legislative session has some general timelines, and we do know that in March we will be, the bill will be voted on in the first Senate Labor Committee. However, as things move from there, it's very, things happen at a pace that's not regular. So I really recommend you follow us at Garment Worker Center. And also when you sign the petition, links that I will drop in the chat, you will be given opportunities, you'll be reached out to so that you know what to do. We have different opportunities for businesses that support the bill, as well as general support from the fashion community and elsewhere. On anyone who wears clothes, really, right, can be supporting this bill. The reason that we're going after the governor is we're not saying that he doesn't necessarily support the bill. We want him to prioritize this bill. We want to make sure, and by when I'm saying we, I mean garment workers. On the first day that the bill could be brought for the 2021 legislative session, it was December 7th, garment workers brought that bill. And we have even more. Last year we had two major co-authors. Now we have Senator Durazo is still our champion, and so is Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. We have 3 to 4, I think maybe even 4 more co-authors right now, because as senators and assembly members were hearing about the bill on the floor, they were saying, sign me up. I want to support that bill. So we're just trying to really show, listen, legislators support this bill, the public supports this bill, and the governor, you need to know about this so that when the time comes for the bill to move on to him, he's already ready to pass it right away. So, because by the time it gets to him, this won't be at least until September. We want him to know, like, when this bill hits your desk, sign it.
Sign it. And this is, I think, to Wendy's point, what's different this time around, right? So we're talking about coalition building from the beginning. We're talking about citizens really galvanizing to action from the start, but also really engaging the governor. And we have some social media assets ready to go to tag Governor Newsom for all of you to really say, hey, I support this bill, so that across all the different things that show up at his desk, this will be something that is prioritized. So, for those of you saying, well, what do I do? Know that we're going to walk with you month by month, do the hand holding, because there's so much going on, y'all, personally in our lives. And so this is going to make sure that we're not just putting a lot of information and going away. And so for this month of January, what's going to be really important is, sign the petition, to Nantara's point, and then for us to be tagging Governor Newsom. And in the notes recap for the Remake community, we'll have some ready to go social media assets, copy that's written. So all you'll have to do is just post it and tag the right folks within the governor's office, so that he can already start to see, wow, there is a global community of people galvanizing to want this bill passed. So there's the governor's office, and we obviously want engagement there from the beginning. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk to you both about LA-based brands. Let's talk a little bit about the virtue signaling from brands. We certainly, in our transparency report, as we were looking at some of the LA brands, it was interesting to see how much greenwashing there is. Even a brand like an Everlane, which has so much of the media attention for being radically transparent. When you look under the hood, there actually isn't that much transparency. And especially when it comes to worker rights, as we had talked about earlier, there was union busting allegations. And, we also know through the pay up work that they were asking for discounts. And so similarly, as we think about LA, what's interesting, Elizabeth and Nantara, is there are so many brands that market themselves as sustainable and ethical. And yet when you're looking under the hood, they're paying rock bottom wages, and one of the things we know from even early engagement with some of these LA-based brands, that there is some rhetoric out there from the Fashion Novas of the world, or Ross back when they would produce here, to say, oh, this bill will be a job killer, and that somehow if you do even the bare minimum, which is pay the minimum wage to workers and not engage in wage theft, you're going to kill all the jobs in California and they're going to go away somewhere else. And so I would love, for both of you to weigh in on this question, and maybe Elizabeth, we start with you first on, lessons drawn from all the ways that we've been engaging brands today and why that's going to be so important. And then coming to you, Nantara, around, how can our community really be supporting the engagement of fashion brands and manufacturers, knowing that outside of Newsom's office, this is a very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in on that. And just to clarify one thing about the petitions, we've mentioned signing the Pay Up Fashion Roadmap petition, but then there's also the petition to support the Garment Worker Protection Act, and both are in the chat, but I just wanted everyone to know those are two separate things.
So many petitions.
Which you have to sign both.
Do both, it'll take 1 minute,
yeah.
Promise.
Yes. So brands. So, I think that there are ethical brands that already understand this, but what the Garment Worker Protection Act will do is level the playing field so that it's not as difficult to be an ethical brand. You know, we already know that there are fashion brands who try to source responsibly, and then they'll find out that there's a sweatshop in their subcontracting, or someone's paying poverty wage somewhere down the line. That hurts brands. So this act is SB 62 is an advantage to any company that wants to be ethical and sustainable, because it is going to make their lives easier. It is raising the bar across the entire industry, so they don't have to worry, they don't have to lose sleep at night that there's a sweatshop somewhere in their supply chain. I think that the other thing that it's going to do is that as smaller brands and fast fashion companies continue to explore onshoring and made in USA, it's going to just make it that much easier for us to really credibly establish the United States as a base of ethical manufacturing. As many of you already know, there was a time in US history when the garment industry in the United States was heavily unionized. You know, there have always been pockets of sweatshops, but it is possible to raise labor standards. You know, it is possible to do all of these things. And how amazing would it be if LA was, you know, instead of being the sweatshop capital of the United States, and to be honest, one of the biggest sweatshop capitals in the world,
Yes.
it would be the headquarters of ethical and sustainable manufacturing. Like, I think that is the vision.
And I think that's the vision really to take to the governor's office, especially knowing that we have legislators that are excited about this, that rather than this being a job killer bill, the future of fashion is ethical and sustainable. And, you know, that's what citizens want. That's what a lot of the smaller creative brands who currently don't have a level playing field want. And it's not fair to them that the Fashion Novas of the world are then, you know, engaged in sweatshop conditions and pumping out product. So Nandar, turning over to you, you know, from your sense is the current interest with brands and manufacturers, knowing that there are, you know, some local brands within our community that are already supporters of the bill, and, you know, what do we need really to show that the business is behind this bill, because that's going to be so critical in its passage.
Absolutely. Well, Elizabeth, you just said all of that so beautifully, and really, like, thinking about this as a level playing field is the best way to also engage brands in this. Right now, we have a lot of brands that are supporting. We have some really big ones that are based in California, that are based in LA too, right? They understand that this is not only good for their own supply chains, right, but like good for the ecosystem, for the fashion ecosystem here. And we also are finding that there are, you know, it's understandable, smaller brands don't necessarily have the time to put into the research that they might think needs to go along with this, because they're being called into so many other initiatives at all times, right? But Garment Workers Center, we have established a business coalition, so leaders from this community who are not only supporting the bill, but in turn sharing with us about what they need in addition to what the Garment Worker Protection Act would enable. So we're learning about what they need for COVID recovery. We're learning about what they need in terms of training to be in accordance with the law. We're learning about how they communicate with their suppliers and what obstacles they see that they find on their own too difficult to overcome. But when we come together in this way, in supporting the bill, in establishing a business coalition that really cares about what made in California, what made in LA, what made in USA, right? What that means. We can do a lot more, because what we're advocating for right now is at the California state level, but we will also be advocating for things at the city and county level that will help support these businesses and actually help them thrive in the long term, while also ensuring that the garment workers are having safe, dignified job opportunities.
And I think one of the targets, I see Annie Shaw, also from the Garment Workers Center, is here. Hi, Annie. That what we're hoping to do is our target goal, so you all know, is to get 120 brands and manufacturers to be supportive of this bill. And as Nantara said, there are many smaller brands that have stepped up, many within our community, but it's going to take all of our citizen power to be engaging a bigger coalition, getting some of the bigger names to recognize, especially those who market themselves as sustainable and ethical, to say, okay, well, here's your words out in the public domain. It's so lovely that you want to talk about circularity and sustainability, but what about paying fashion's most essential workers fairly? And so in terms of, how this will go, now that the bill has been reintroduced, we have a wonderful Remake ambassador here, Samida, who has written just the nuts and bolts. She's waving here. I'll pin her so you all can see. She's been incredible, and we are so grateful to you. There'll be an article dropping today, really explaining the nuts and bolts of this bill so that you have that. If you have any questions about what is SB 62, what are the legal ramifications, and really be able to, in an elevator pitch, explain that. Next, it's really about the social media assets, which, Katrina, if you can redrop them so they're in the front of the chat. It's about all of us starting to post all through January with really this focus of, Governor Newsom, we support SB 62 because. And then as we start to get a list of the brands that we are wanting as a part of this business coalition, in a future call, likely early March, we'll come back to you really with clarity of these are the brands that are stepping up, and these are the brands that are not, where we will need some of our gentle citizen power to say, hey, I'd love to shop with you, but I need you to support this bill first. And so really making it very easy for our community to be engaging and helping build that business coalition. So those are some of the CTAs. I'll summarize again before we close out here, but I would love questions from our community. And if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you. If you prefer to put it in the chat, that's fine too. There are no silly questions. This is a community of love and kindness, and we're just here to chat and make you comfortable about this bill and why it's so important. So any questions?
I see one from Emily. She asks, Emily, do you want to read it? Emily McKay, or I can also read it.
Sure, I can read it for sure. So I basically said, if companies are turning more so to onshoring, like you said, Elizabeth, for manufacturing, where does the industry find a balance between the sustainability aspect of like locally sourced and made in America, considering there's no shipping in terms of like CO2 waste and stuff like that? Where do we find a balance while still making sure that garment workers abroad remain employed in the long run?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. That's a really good question. So, right now, I think it's still only like 2 to 3% of the clothing sold in the United States is domestically made. So we're not really at a place where, made in the USA is encroaching on clothing manufactured elsewhere. But I don't think we have to look at this as like a zero-sum game where if we grow the market in the US, it's going to detract from sourcing overseas. Fashion is a $3 trillion industry. There's billions of garments manufactured globally. And Nayantara, you can probably talk about this a little bit more, but Made in USA is usually, it's a different market, and the types of products that are sourced in the United States tend to be different than those that are made in, say, Bangladesh. Like Bangladesh has huge factories that are very focused on mass market clothing for giant brands, whereas Made in the USA tends to be focused on shorter runs, fast fashion that needs quick turnaround, and then again, these like smaller ethical and sustainable companies. So I think there's room for everyone to flourish in this new paradigm.
I agree. I think that there are major multinational companies that are going to always have a mixed assortment of where they're sourcing from. And they saw that in the past year, especially, it was really helpful to have some domestic manufacturing. And we really are just trying to strengthen that. It's not going to take away from the garment manufacturing that's happening already throughout the world. And in fact, right, people in those places also need to wear clothes. There's always going to be a market for those garments that might just require some shifting in terms of like what's destined for export versus what remains imported, and oversight over that.
If you look at, data, it's at 97%, sort of it hovers between 97, 98% comes from overseas. And, you look at a market like Sri Lanka, where they've done so much R&D investment, there's so much technology, innovation, a lot of our athletics and lingerie happen to come from there because of those investments. So it's not like that market is going to dry up. But I do think that, especially given the pandemic shock and knowing that this is not the only shock in our lifetime, that it is smart for brands to be thinking about, with nearshoring, what does that mean from a supply chain resilience standpoint? How can you really set up a vertically integrated facility that's ethical and sustainable, and really, to Elizabeth's point, market ourselves as the sustainable capital of the United States? So there's a question here from Adriana with support from Ariana, which I absolutely love. Adriana, do you want to ask your question live? Go ahead.
Hi. Sorry, can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, we can.
Well, I've been an ambassador the entire last year, but I was pregnant and not too active. But this campaign, I think it's very important. It's very delicate, and I think there is a lot of, a large community of Spanish-speaking people here in the States and in Mexico in my channels. And what I hear from them is that sustainable fashion sometimes is so, the language is so technique or difficult to understand, and they are lazy to read it in English, or they do not speak English. And since we need a lot of signatures, I think translating into Spanish could be very helpful, considering also that there is many Mexican immigrants working in the garment industry in LA, and this could, resonate with them. I'm pretty confident that translating a lot of the content on Remake into Spanish would help a lot, and I am very happy to support with that and be more helpful with you guys.
Absolutely. And then did you want to talk about, I know a lot of the resources that you all produce are in dual language, but Adrienne, I did want to also acknowledge and just say thank you. This is the power of our community, on how much we never raise problems. We often start with solutions, and for you to offer to roll up your sleeves and translate some of these campaign assets into Spanish for the Remake community would be incredible. It's something we want to get to, it's something that our community has brought up. And as you all know, with our webinars, we're also working on assuring language justice, especially as we will feature garment makers from the LA industry, as we did last year, making sure that there's translation available and she can really speak to her story herself. But Nandar, if there are some Spanish assets currently, or the petition, if you could drop that in the chat, that would be wonderful. And then Sam, if you could follow up with Adriana after this call on translating some of the social media, that'll be great. Amazing. Well, we have time for one more question. And Carolina, I so appreciate our European friends, wants to know, what can we do to help here from Europe? So Nandar, nothing behooves anyone from not being in the US to sign the petition or tag folks, correct?
I think that it's certainly fine to tag on social media. I will have to do a double check and just find out about signing the petition. And that might also even involve, I'm not sure if that, I don't think our petition has any address information, but it might just even just be a matter of like tweaking something, right? Because our US addresses are different. But I'll find out and send an update to you all to share. Yeah.
I'll also add that the social media part of the campaign is global, and we're actually going to be pressuring all large brands pretty much we want the entire fashion industry to be in support of this bill, because like I was saying at the beginning of the talk, we view it as precedent setting and something that we hope raises the bar for working standards globally. So yes, we absolutely want people in Europe to be supporting on social media.
So I think to bring it home for you all, the slide that I just shared, and I will put it back up. If you are in Europe, if you're in a different part of the United States, nothing precludes you from participating in at least this part of the action, which is, we've dropped the beautiful assets that Katrina and team have made about why we want to pass a fair minimum wage here in California. We've got the hashtags, it's one legal wage and pay her. We know this is a predominantly female population, and so really a play on pay up, pay her. I hope you guys like it. It's to say, and tag Governor Newsom, Senate President Tony Atkins, and the Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon. Hopefully I've not mutilated any of those names, but those are the tags. They'll be included in the notes. And I think if we can really galvanize a community of some 612 people to do that, but also get your friends, family, community to do that as well, that's going to be the most important action to take in January. And as I said, as we start to get a sense of which brands are supporting the bill and which ones are not, we will come back to you all with that information and a ready to go campaign in March, because it really will be a time to hold brands accountable, and building a business coalition is going to be really key to passing this bill. So I wanted to thank our wonderful panelists, and before giving you all a few Remake updates, really bring this home on a personal and high note. And Nandita, maybe starting with you, you've been doing this work for a long time. I certainly get asked this question a lot, when you're organizing and the issues are heavy and just generally our world feels very dark right now. What do you do personally in your practice to feel inspired and authentic? And what advice might you have for this incredible community of change makers to stay hopeful?
Well, I struggle with this often, but I think the one thing that I'll just, a moment that happened was when the bill failed to be brought for a vote last year in September. We were up until midnight. That was the end of the day, right? And we were watching with members on Zoom the whole time for days in a row, really. And members were they were watching when they were at work at the factories. They were watching while they were at home preparing meals for their family, late into the night, even though they had to get up. As soon as we all found out that the bill failed to be brought for a vote, they were like, okay, let's keep going. I was sad. The Garment Worker Center staff, the director, we were all like sad, scared, like gonna cry. And members were like, all right, let's keep going. And that is what inspires and motivates me, because these are essential workers. We have the benefit as a staff of working from home. We have a lot of comforts and things that we can do to take care during this time. And the truth is that garment workers don't have those privileges. And so I really just try to keep that in mind, because that's the motivation, really. That's where we get our inspiration. That's where we get our strength. And it comes directly from the garment workers who are dedicated to passing this bill.
I love that so much, and then it's often garment workers are painted as this victim to save. And much like you, all the women I have had the privilege of sitting down and meeting in my career are so fierce and fighting so hard. And so then you think, if you can do it, why not I? And so that's just amazing. Elizabeth, curious, what are your 2021 resolutions? Anything as we are all setting intentions for the year, what are your goals going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I agree so wholeheartedly with what Nayantara was saying about this idea of worker-centric justice and labor rights, and just listening to what workers are fighting for and amplifying that is such a key part of what our movement exists to do. I also find a lot of inspiration in that expression, we're the ones that we've been waiting for. I think I'm saying it the right way. I am continuously amazed working in Pay Up where we'll say, you know, why isn't the International Labor Organization or some huge company doing the right thing? And sometimes it takes a lot of times, it takes people power to get these things done. And if you're sitting around wondering why isn't this or that injustice being resolved, you know, that is often your first kind of hint that you're the person that can fill that role and really change things for the better.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And, you know, knowing that you are going closer into your activist route and, you know, out there, even on Instagram, regardless of the questions, like we can't buy our way into a sustainable fashion future. This has to be rooted in organizing and pushing for legal reform. I just love that so very much. And, you know, on a personal level, for me, when it comes to resolutions, it really is about getting this bill passed. And like, here we are, a San Francisco-based organization out there doing the global work. And so, you know, SB 62 is absolutely there, giving it our very best shot and spending all our time and energy as a community to make that happen, because it really would be, to Nantara's point, a test case for how we could push for regulation and the right type of reform globally. And the other focus really is, you all may have seen, you know, the next iteration from Pay Up of us now demanding from the global brand community to push for sharing your profits. You know, end of the year, most of the fashion brands, the top 20, certainly the top 30 even, have made billions, if not millions, in profit. And as earning reports have come in, some of these brands continue to drag their heels when it comes to honoring contracts. Many of them are talking about working through the ILO or the USAID process to get money in the hands of garment workers, but we know that no money has reached. And so a big part of the Remake community's focus beyond SB 62 is going to be about pushing fashion's most profitable brands to share their profits. You know, all we're asking for is 1% of net income. The humanitarian crisis for fashion's most essential workers, garment workers, continues to widen. We know through the holidays that workers are reporting nutritional deficiency, housing insecurity, women talking about being sex trafficked, and it's just unconscionable when you've got brands like an ASOS or a Nike posting billions of dollars in profit. And so special shout out to Camila, who's here as one of our fashion ambassadors, who helped us as a numbers person, me and Elizabeth, to look through the earning reports from the brands. We have the numbers, we'll be putting it up on Instagram, we'll be sharing with you. And really the focus is to be getting direct relief from these profitable brands into the hands of workers as quickly as possible. And so I wanted to close with just a few of the exciting things that we have. I already mentioned our Share Your Profits Transparency campaign, which will be my personal resolution along with SB 62. I now wanted to turn it over to our fearless leader, Sam, to talk about some of the fun things we have lined up for the community and leadership development front as well.
Great. Hey everyone, so glad y'all could make this first call of the year. Taking some learnings that we heard last year in our
Yep, she froze. Sam, you froze, but go right ahead. I know you had a profound thought there, so go on.
Here, is this better? Can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically we are working to have more community opportunities to bring this group together more than just these monthly calls, knowing some of us are still sheltering in place. Some of us are still going to school online versus in person. So in February, this will be one of our first moments. We're going to have kind of a Galentine Day mixer for Remake ambassadors, but we're hoping it's a way to kind of get on Zoom, get into small groups, have some like starter conversations and really get to know who's in this great global community that we have. So keep an eye out for that. And maybe before I froze, I also mentioned that we are still doing our end of year survey. So if you haven't taken that, we would love for you to fill it out as much as possible. We really love your feedback and we're working to incorporate that into our plans as me and Caroline start building this program out for 2021. And we're also looking to do some one-on-one listening with me and Aisha. So if you'd really love to have a combo with us and just share your experience with this ambassador program, that would be amazing. So look for those tidbits coming in your recap email that Caroline will be sending.
Yes, I mean, you all said, you know, I want more confidence building workshops, public speaking. I want more one-on-one time, some mentorship opportunities. I want to feel safe and brave to come into my activist roots and just know that we are here for you. And, you know, those sign-up sheets will be going out. And I am personally really looking forward to some of those more intimate conversations. We're right at time. So, you know, happy January, happy 2021, everyone. Stay safe, mask up, stay hopeful. If there's anything that you need from your community, know that we're here, lean into us. We got this. And I think 2021 will be brighter, especially if we get SB 62 passed. So with that, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists, Elizabeth and then Tara. Sign the petition, get on social media, y'all. And I will see you in February. Sending you all so much love and light always. Really, this is, you know, amazing to see so many of you at the start of the year. We'll see you all next month. Bye.